This is the story of the time an actual murderer tried to kill me, and I survived. It wasn't some hardened criminal, or a scary-looking skinhead, or a badass gangster. It was a little old woman, but she was a legit killer. She'd shot her husband in the chest with a shotgun 2 years prior to me meeting her. She did not do any jail time because she had numerous witnesses that had confirmed her story of self-defense. The rumor around the hood told a different tale, but regardless, she had truly killed a man, and the shotgun that leaned in the corner of her foyer was probably the murder weapon. Anyway, I met this woman at the height of my drug addiction. I'm sober now, going on 6 years, but at the time I did a lot of opioids. My favorites were Percocets. A fellow junkie happily informed me that we had a promising new plug who sold her 70-pill prescriptions each month. Miss Coco. I go to this address the very next day and realize this woman lived only a few streets down from my homegirl Selena. I stopped by her place first to say hi. When she asked me why I was in the neighborhood, I told her I was coming to see Miss Coco, and her expression changed. That's when I learned not only the story of the murder, but a bunch of other crazy stories about shit she had done to people in the hood. Selena begged me to be careful. I'm like, whatever, it's an old woman, I ain't scared. I slide over to the address of this little shotgun house and knocked on the door. She was supposed to be expecting me. The door cracked barely open, and I saw how short and old she was. All I could really see was a slice of her face and one of her bloodshot eyes. She asked my name. I told her, and she opened the door, motioning for me to enter. Right away, I saw the gun leaned in the corner. She told me to follow her, and I finally got a real good look. She was so feeble looking, not skinny, but short and hunched over, and walked with a cane. Her head was wrapped in a silk bonnet, and she was wearing something like a muumuu. We're in the living room now, and she asked me to sit down. I chose the only empty spot on the couch. The entire house was cluttered, but not dirty. Suddenly, though, an oddly placed rug on otherwise bare floors made me wonder how hard it was to get blood out of wooden floorboards. Did Selena say she actually killed that guy in here? She offered me a drink and a snack. She looked at me with surprisingly kind eyes. What a strange drug deal, I thought, but how sweet of her. I remember thinking Selena was foolish for buying into all the hood tales of how dangerous this woman was. I drank a soda, downed a snack, and purchased her entire script of pain pills. She'd be getting it filled again on the same day next month, she informed me. Okay, great. See you then. I returned on a routine schedule for several months, always drink a soda, always downed a snack, and went happily on my merry, intoxicated way. I even got to know her a bit during my visits. Her diabetes, her kids, how helpful weed was for her pain. I brought her a joint to share here and there. I even helped her move some furniture one day. Never a mention of her late husband, though, and I wasn't going to ask. I had long forgotten any sort of wild ideas about this old, sweet woman possibly snapping at any moment. One summer month, it was my day to go to Miss Coco's. My boy Sean was with me already, so I decided to let him ride along. We show up, go inside, same routine as always. She looked at him somewhat suspiciously, but I told her he was good people, and she allowed him in. During our little chat, Sean mentioned something about wanting to see a movie that had just come out. I cannot for the life of me remember which movie. Miss Coco got excited and told us she happened to have a bootleg of that exact movie that we could borrow. She let us look through a giant stack of bootleg, burned DVDs and borrow whatever we wanted. We took 3 of them, and she simply asked that we return them when we were done. That night, we decided to watch the one Sean had wanted to see, so we popped it into the player at my place. Immediately, it was unwatchable. It seriously looked like a cell phone video. You could see people in the theater walking in front of the screen. The guy filming was loudly talking throughout the entire film. Garbage. We laughed about it, assumed the other 2 were just as bad, and watched something else. A few days later, I was going to hang out with Selena, so I figured I'd swing by and return the DVDs to Miss Coco. I tried calling, but she didn't answer. I walked up to the doorstep and knocked, but there was still no answer. I figure, no big deal, I'll just leave him here by the door for her. She had a storm door that had a screen on the top half, and was solid metal on the bottom half. I opened that door, propped the shitty DVDs up against her actual door, and then closed it. That way they couldn't be seen, and they were protected from the weather as well. I go on to Selena's place and don't give it a second thought. Later that night, I'm getting high with my friends, and my phone starts ringing. I'm seriously faded, so I just decided to ignore it. I don't feel like talking. It rings again. And again. Finally, my homie is like, "You gonna answer that?" So I pull out my phone to check it. It was Miss Coco. She never calls me. Ever. Especially not late at night. Having her number in my phone was strictly for the purpose of me calling her on the 12th of each month to announce what time I was coming over. That's it. Today was only the 9th. I thought maybe something bad had happened and she needed help. I called back and she picked up before it even rang one time. She was furious. I mean, absolutely livid. She did not sound like the little old lady whose couch I chilled on. She was extremely pissed about the fact that I had left her DVDs in the door. She lectured me about how a dumbass white person like me just doesn't understand how things work in the hood. Someone could have seen me leave them there and could have come behind me and stolen them. I should have waited until she was home. I was disrespectful and rude and ungrateful. She went on and on. I didn't have an attitude in my voice, and I did apologize, but I also mentioned that even though I appreciated the gesture, the movies were really pretty terrible and not worth watching again. Abruptly, and very eerily, her tone changed. Suddenly she was sweet old Miss Coco again. She told me I was right and she was just a little on edge that night. She apologized for her reaction and told me I was good to her and didn't deserve that. Then, she said, as a matter of fact, she had gotten her script early that month. She picked it up earlier that day. Why don't I come over and get it tonight? Now, any sane, sober person would have immediately noticed the red flags here, but in my infinite knotted-out wisdom, I thought Junkie Jesus had performed a miracle on me and that my night was about to get even better. Time to get extra faded, bros. I'll be back with more goodies as soon as possible. I head off down the street to Miss Coco's house. I'm still very, very high. I'm walking up to the house and I see that the DVDs are still there. Miss Coco opens the door before I even get up to the step and tells me to pick up the movies and bring them inside. Her voice was stern, which was unlike her, but she didn't sound crazy like she had on the phone. I bring them into the living room where I always go to sit, and something is just off. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I realize she's still behind me, in the foyer area. She starts telling me the same things she was saying on the phone, but calmly this time. My back is still to her. I don't say a word. I set the DVDs on the side table, and despite being extremely inebriated, finally realize that I'm definitely not here to pick up pills. A temporary sobriety of the survival instinct variety kicked in all at once. Everything just sort of clicked into such a clear, crisp vividness that I'll never forget. I knew she was standing exactly where the shotgun leans. I knew she was in between me and the door. I knew that she wanted to kill me, and I knew she had already had a whole gang of local folk ready to corroborate whatever story she came up with. Every single detail that Selena had described to me that day, that she warned me about Miss Coco, played through my mind in a matter of seconds. I ran. I burst out through the back of the living room, knocking over that stack of bullshit bootleg DVDs as I scrambled past it. I'll be honest, once I had found my way out the back door, I wasn't that scared anymore. It's not like she was going to catch me. I circled back around the tiny house and took off down the street, probably before she even managed to hobble around and look out the front door for me. I never did see if she actually picked up the gun. My back was to her, and I made the decision to run without even turning around, but I just knew it. I felt it. It was a feeling I won't soon forget. The scary part was knowing just how absolutely mind-numbingly high I was and how oblivious I was until the very last second. And that's the story about how I almost was taken out by a crazy little old lady with a shotgun over the world's shittiest bootleg DVDs. Makes you wonder what small infraction her late husband committed. When I was in 3rd grade, I remember getting called to the front office to be dismissed. I always knew when I would be getting dismissed beforehand, so this caught me completely off guard. Maybe my mom was going to surprise me with a day off? Maybe? Anyway, I get about halfway to the office and my teacher comes up behind me screaming at the top of her lungs to get back into the classroom now. She grabbed my arm super hard, which I understand now as an adult, and dragged me back into the classroom. I thought I was in trouble. She immediately slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, then flipped the lights off. At this point, I'm very, very confused. The classroom phone was lying on her desk instead of being hung up on the wall. She whispers into the phone that I'm officially back into the room and in lockdown. Then, an announcement over the school's intercom informs the entire school that they need to be in lockdown and that all students need to run back to the classrooms. Cue the silent panic. Long story short, some random guy tried to dismiss me from school to kidnap me. We don't know who he was or anything about him. My mother was immediately called to dismiss me after being phoned about the incident. She had to show her license and walk all the way to the classroom to physically walk with me. 3 days after this event, it happened on a Friday, we had full photo name tags for any non-student, aka an adult, who wanted to walk through the office doors. You had to give your license number, scan a copy of your license, take a current pic to be printed on a temp badge, then be cleared to enter the actual building by scanning the photo ID temp badge. It makes me sick to think about it. I now have a 3-year-old daughter myself, who I am slightly nervous about sending to school in a few years. Fortunately, school security is way more amped up than it was back in the 90s. When I was 11, my mother and I lived with her boyfriend Rick, who I hated. He was occasionally physically abusive to me and was always intimidating. Anyway, when it got super creepy was one rainy Saturday morning. My mom was at work, so it was just me and Rick at home. The phone rang at about 8 a.m. and I jumped out of bed and went to the kitchen to answer it. It was my Little League coach calling to confirm that my baseball game had been rained out. I headed back toward my bedroom, but had to pass Rick's bedroom to get there. As I did, there he stood, 6'2", and buck naked. Not wanting to chat with any grown naked man, I averted my gaze and tried to shoot into my bedroom. As I tried to shut the door, I felt something block it open. Rick had followed me to my room and stuck his foot out to keep me from shutting the door. He stood right beside me, towering over me and asking what that call was. I told him, but he just stood there, 2 feet away, naked and glaring at me for what was probably 30 seconds, but felt more like 5 minutes. He said nothing but stared angrily at me. I was already terrified of him from some violence he had committed against me before, but this was just different. This felt like a strange, sexual intimidation. Very scary for a young boy, and very creepy. He finally turned around and walked away. Nothing like that ever happened again, but I did later learn he had some strange sexual issues. I was left with the feeling that he was sizing me up on a very creepy and unhealthy way. It has stuck with me for almost 35 years now. I used to have a pretty shit job at a casino that got me working some pretty weird hours. Some days I would work a normal 9 to 5, others I would go in at 6 p.m. and not leave until 2 or 3 a.m. It wasn't really a big deal, except by the time in the morning, all the parking spaces around my apartment building would be taken, so I had to park a few blocks away and walk to get to my building. I would park, get my pepper spray and keys in hand, lock my door, and walk the block or two to my building. I never felt like I was in any way unsafe until one night when I found a parking space across the street from my building that happened to be in front of a bar. I pulled into the space and got my keys ready. I noticed the guy smoking in the doorway of the bar, about 5 cars down, but he was looking in the other direction and didn't seem to care that I was there. I got out of the car and was about halfway across the street before he noticed I was a girl, and I heard him yell, "Hey, sweetie!" I ignored him, and that must have pissed him off because he yelled, "Bitch!" I started sprinting to my building when I heard the sound of him running up behind me. The building I lived in at the time had been built a long time ago, and everything was outdated, including the security system. After 10 p.m., the doors would lock automatically, and you would have to put a key in the lock and turn it for the doors to open, and it would take forever. I finally got the door open and had just shut it before he got there and was yanking on the handle and screaming at me. My skin was crawling for a few days after that. I was 11 and living in the States. My parents and I lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. One day, my dad noticed a lawn chair had been dragged through from the outer back garden to the front of my parents' window. The ceiling of the window had almost completely been removed. Basically, someone had meticulously taken the time to take the ceiling off the window in order to pop it out. It turns out that the week prior, a neighbor's house had been broken into, so we chalked it up to someone trying to steal our shit. Over the next month, things like this kept happening until eventually my mother was being driven so crazy by the idea of someone being this desperate and not getting caught that she ended up staying in the guest room near the front of the house with a golf club handy. The night we caught the fucker is still so vivid. I was up late watching cartoons, as a lot of kids did when they were my age. When my dog started growling so low and so deep, I started to freak the fuck out. I never heard something so menacing before, and I instantly knew that something was wrong. Every hair on my body stood up. He was staring straight ahead at my window where the blinds were drawn, but it was as if he could see someone right through them. Next thing I know, I hear my mom scream at the top of her lungs, "Caught you now, fucker!" As any smart 11-year-old would, I ran out of the room as quick as lightning to see my mother busting out the front door and chasing this asshole down our little suburban street with a golf club. Obviously, the guy was too quick and got away. The police were called, and within 20 minutes, the guy was in the back of the police cruiser. My mom was called out to identify him, as she confirmed he was the right guy. The officer who had entered his name into whatever system they used turned to his colleague and said, "Registered sex offender on parole." I was old enough to know what that meant. The next day, my mom did her research and found this guy's name and history. It turns out he was in jail for previously a 12-year-old girl. The guy wasn't just trying to steal our possessions, he was a sick fucking child molester. She later spoke to a friend who lived 3 streets away from us. It turns out she'd been given the piece of paper that said he moved into their vicinity. The entire experience is quite surreal to me. All those what-ifs hung around for a while, but we didn't let the bad vibes get to us too much knowing this guy had been thrown back in jail. I was visiting a friend who lives in a community with a main road that leads back into the mountains and an abandoned mining town nearby. I was parked with my friend on that road right at the point where it turned from a well-lit, regular suburban road into a dark, winding mountain road. There was a gate right behind our car, and you could see the reflective sign illuminated from the brake lights of the car. We're just talking and drinking coffee, and generally not feeling too out of place or anything. We were parked under the last street light before darkness on a road perpendicular to that gate. Out of nowhere, my friend looks in the rearview mirror, and his eyes go wide. He slams on the gas, and we speed off. He's breathing hard and obviously scared. I'm screaming at him to tell me what the fuck just happened, and he says this. By chance, he pressed the brake lights, which illuminated more of the dark surroundings than the normal running lights of the back of his car. This caused him to notice that when he glanced in the rearview mirror, a full-grown man in what he described as large boots and a dirty, dark, thick jacket and dirty pants was in a full-on sprint towards our car, and so my friend sped out of there as quick as he could. There were always stories of what goes down in that abandoned mining town. A lot of movies are filmed there, and people can visit the town, and a ranger lives there. Some people say occult shit goes on there. People have been found murdered and robbed down along that road. And evidence of cult practices also happen every once in a while, according to the people who live there. When my friend was telling me what he had seen, all I could think of was that guy grabbing us, robbing us, and murdering us. He would throw our bodies in the thick foliage that covers so much of the surrounding area and be on his way. Just as I was finished thinking that thought, I looked over and my door was unlocked. I was dating a girl for a while, and despite living and working on the opposite side of town, she'd always be near this one neighborhood coffee shop that I frequented, so I'd randomly run into her there and ask what brought her to that neck of the woods. She'd usually reply, grabbing some coffee, or, I had a hunch you'd be here and wanted to say hi. One day, she up and moves out of the state with zero warning. She tells me that we just aren't dating anymore. I was confused, but it was casual, so while it sucked, I just thought, oh, she probably had some family emergency or something and didn't want to tell me. A few weeks later on her Snapchat, I see that she's making absolute stacks in San Diego and is always wearing the same uniform in these pictures. I was a bit confused but didn't think much of it. I started dating this other chick who frequented the aforementioned coffee shop, and after a month or two of dating, the first chick comes back and starts hanging out with her a bunch around the same neighborhood the coffee shop was in. A week later, both of them are moving to San Diego and want me to come with them, live with them, and work where they work. Something just felt extremely fishy, so I said no, and off they went. Eventually, a picture got posted with both of them in it, in front of a very strange but very instantly familiar building, the HQ of the Church of Scientology. The reason the original chick was always in that neighborhood is because Kitty Corner from the coffee shop was the local chapter of the Church of Scientology. She got pretty ingrained in the church and moved to San Diego to work for them, then came back to recruit gullible people to come back with her. And that's the story of how I lost 2 girlfriends to the Church of Scientology and was none the wiser. Definitely glad I dodged that bullet. I left the store and it soon became obvious something was wrong with my car. I pulled into the Walmart parking lot I was by and, yep, flat tire on the front left side. My rather pregnant wife and 3-year-old daughter get out. It was really hot. I ended up getting the crappy scissor jack that came with the car, and I was about to get started when my brother-in-law stopped to see if we needed anything. So I said, maybe let your sister and niece sit in the car while I change the tire. I loosed the lug nuts, jacked the car up, pulled the lug nuts off, and the tire is a little stuck. I lay down partially under the car to pull on the tire. The next thing I hear is my brother-in-law shouting, "Look out!" So I just roll away from the car, and the very next thing I hear is crunching metal. The crappy jack had snapped in half, dropping the car all the way to the ground where my arm and shoulder have been like 1 second earlier. There was no damage done to me, but I had to walk the adrenaline rush off for the next few minutes after that. Fortunately, we had AAA, so they sent a guy to come fix it. The tow truck driver said he'd seen those cheap jacks snap a bunch of times before. So, if the only jack you have for your car is the crappy screw-type jack, please buy another one, please. I do not expect to come that close to getting injured and not have anything happen twice in one lifetime. Me and my girlfriend at the time were traveling from New Zealand to my family back home in Sweden. We both decided to spend a bit more money to fly back through Paris instead of Amsterdam, just because we wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. It ended up costing us maybe an extra $50, and we got to see it on the landing and then take off, but never actually set foot in Paris proper because we were poor students. When we landed in Auckland, New Zealand, jet-lagged to shit, we turned on our phones and noticed that we have about 50 missed calls from our travel agent, which was odd. When we call her back, she sounds super relieved and out of breath. She tells us the flight she originally suggested to us, the one from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was shot down over Ukraine. My brain couldn't process that information at the time, but once I woke up the next day, it hit me like a ton of bricks. $50 made the difference between seeing the big steel thingy that has so many photos of it and being sent to Sweden in body bags piece by piece. Sometimes the absurdity of my existence comes over me, and this story always gives me goosebumps. One hell of a story to tell over beers, though. I almost got run over by a teenage girl while walking back to my house a few years ago. Actually, it was pretty stupid of me. I watched her before she pulled out into traffic. I had seen that she barely checked her left-hand side, and I knew she couldn't have seen me walking. I should have known better, but I decided that I had enough time to get by her. I get about halfway behind her SUV, and she floors it. Well, maybe she didn't floor it, but she definitely did not back out slowly. I had to brace myself against her back windshield and sprint my way around the car as she backed into the street. I don't know how I didn't end up under the car, to be honest. She caught up with me a few blocks later and apologized profusely. She was fairly shook. I was pretty shook up as well and a little angry. I told her that it was alright, but to just be a little more careful next time. In the end, I like to think it made her a much safer driver, since it seemed like she had just gotten her license. It made me a smarter driver and pedestrian as well. I always check and double check before I pull out anywhere anymore, and when I'm walking, I'm much more aware of what cars are doing around me. This was definitely my closest call, though. My story happened quite a while back in North California. I'm now 21. So when I was about 6 or 7, I had a best friend from church. I completely envied her as a child, her clothes, lip gloss, dolls, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, we always played together after church because our dads were also best friends. The thing is, when little girls are best pals, they always want to have sleepovers. It's the thing to do. So, being that we were just the stereotypical girls, my friend would always beg me to spend the night after church so we could hang out. My mom, being the typical overprotective person that she is, always said no. Even with threats of tears and whines, I never got to stay. Years later, I moved away but went back to visit for a wedding. We're now 14 or so, and tried our luck again at persuading my parents to let me spend the night, and to our amazement, my mother actually said yes. Years later, my dad gets an emergency call, and we travel back to that same town. It turns out that her dad had been molesting her since she was about 5 years old, as well as her cousins and extended family that would spend the night. My mom freaks out and asks me if anything happened. Luckily, nothing ever did, but I felt like this was a pretty close call. This happened in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, within a few days actually, and was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The fact that me and my sister are still alive today and with our family is amazing. My sister and I were throwing a baseball in the front yard when my sister threw it badly and I had to go chase after it. Well, where I was going to get the ball, I could still see her, but a truck pulled up and I'm assuming couldn't see me. Then a man jumped out, grabbed my sister, and jumped back into the truck. Unbeknownst to me, my dad also saw, but I took off running after the truck too. I was only 15 at the time, but I played many sports and was quite athletic, and for whatever reason the truck stopped at the end of the street just long enough for me to reach it and open the door. I grabbed my sister who was fighting with the man in the front seat, but in the process of pulling on her, I pull him out too and we start fighting. I tell my sister to run and she does, but I can't get away from the man myself. The driver walks around and tells me I've made a huge mistake and points a gun right in my face. All of a sudden I hear my dad bellow, "Drop it or I'll kill you both," with his shotgun aimed at the guy's chest. The guy I'm wrestling with lets go and jumps in the truck, but the other guy was not so lucky. He rounded the truck with the gun still in his hand and my dad shot. My dad says he barely nicked him just to get the point across, but the man screamed, dropped the gun, jumped in the truck and took off. As he drove off, Dad shot the truck so cops could identify it easier. There was a significant amount of blood where the guy had been shot. Also, just to give you an idea of what things are like when the government is broken, we called the cops, and after hearing that we were okay, they told us sorry, but they had bigger things to deal with. Here's a little background to the story. When I was in 6th grade, I was unfortunate enough to get Burkitt's lymphoma. Chemo is the usual treatment, and along with that, part of the chemo is to get spinal taps to protect and test the spinal cord. It's important to note that I was also a freakishly large 6th grader and just under 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. So the events went down like this. On a particular spinal tap, I was resisting the anesthesia they had given me. I attribute this to me being huge and the children's hospital just not having to deal with kids this large usually. They had to up the dosage. Not a problem. I got knocked out fine and the procedure went as planned. Fast forward to the next time I needed to get one. Before they put me under, the doctor had mentioned that it was her first time doing one solo and that she was really excited. Uh-oh. She read my chart, pumped me full of anesthesia, and did the procedure. The problem is this. When the doctor looked at how much knockout juice they gave me the last time, she looked at the total amount they gave me and gave it to me at once instead of spreading it out over the hour or however long the first tap went. The next thing I remember is being very groggy and just wanting to go back to sleep. But the nurse, doctor, anesthesiologist, and my mom were all trying to get me to stay awake. I was pissed and just wanted to take a nap, but they were having none of it. I found out later that my heart slowed way down. My blood pressure had dropped significantly, and apparently I was about as close to dead as you can get without being dead. The doctor apologized over and over to me and my mother. And that's how I got unlimited ice cream at the hospital. I was carjacked by a guy who had just robbed an auto store. This was December of 2002. I had just gotten done dropping my then wife off at the airport. She was flying back to California for Christmas. I had stopped by Wendy's on the way back because nothing says woo-woo a week of peace and quiet like 2 junior bacon cheeseburgers. Unknown to me, at about this time, 3 people were robbing an auto parts store in Georgetown, Texas. Georgetown is a small town north of Austin and Round Rock, but still very much a suburb of Austin. These 3 pistol-whipped the clerks, stole their money, and stole a vehicle to get away. They proceeded to go down south on I-35 from Georgetown to Austin. One of the clerks flagged down a passing cop and pointed out the stolen vehicle, so by this time the 3 idiots had 2 cop cars in pursuit of them. Meanwhile, I was moving northbound on the frontage road of I-35. The frontage road was moving much faster than that of the freeway, and I kind of dig riding along the frontage roads anyway. This was also the last Friday before Christmas that year, so I suspected we had a lot more traffic than normal. The suspects hit a traffic jam on southbound, and traffic literally came to a halt. 2 of the suspects jumped out of the car and over the center divider. Multiple officers did the same thing, giving pursuit. 1 cop shattered his ankle while landing because it was about an 8-foot drop. The 3rd guy gave up in the car. I was about to meet a guy with a gun. About this time, I saw a sheriff's deputy running southbound on the northbound shoulder. Traffic in front of me came to a standstill, and so did I. At this point, I saw the cop stop about 60 feet away and draw his gun. I turned my head to see someone standing at my door. He reaches into his waistband, pulls out a gun, puts it to my head, and says, "Get out of the fucking car." Meanwhile, the deputy is yelling, "Drop the gun, get down," etc. As I was getting out of the car and the carjacker was getting in, he put the gun to the back of my head. Sheriff then fired the first shot. It hit the carjacker in the shoulder and knocked the gun away from my head. They then started exchanging shots with each other. I hit the deck and realized how close I was to the action. So I got back up, ran like hell for the grass, and dropped there. The 3rd guy just kept running all the way to Mexico. He has never been caught. Suspect got hit 3 times. He was hit in the shoulder, head, and through the hand. The shot to the head entered the front of his head and went around the outside of the skull and exited the back of his head. It didn't pierce his skull at all. And for a little bit of karma justice, he additionally got shrapnel from my dashboard in his stomach as it exploded from the gunfire. I survived with just glass in my head and a new lease on life. Here is a picture of the car after the incident. To answer the most common questions, I only had liability, so had to pay for damage myself. In theory, I may have been able to get some compensation from the city or victims' assistance, but quite honestly was just happy to be alive. Here are some comments on did the officer put my life in danger by firing a shot first. I don't know what was happening behind me. I didn't see it. I've come to know the officer very well since the incident and do not in any way believe he would have fired had he not thought his life or mine was in immediate danger. I believe to this day that if he hadn't fired the shot, I would be dead now. And truthfully, it doesn't matter, because I lived. One February day 10 years ago, a younger and much nerdier version of me was walking home from school together with a few classmates. The temperature had been around 0 degrees Celsius for the last week, some days above, resulting in thawing of the still thick layer of snow, and some days right below, refreezing the water, creating extremely slippery roads. As we were walking uphill, happy that school was over for the day, some of the cooler kids started to throw snowballs at each other. Suddenly, they decided to all gang up on the smallest amongst the group, me. As the snowballs flew towards me through the air, I flinched and took a step backwards, slipped on a spot of ice, and fell out onto the road. As I spun around 180 degrees in midair, I could see an old Volvo just a few meters away from me, heading in my direction, downhill, on an icy road. As I fall on my stomach and close my eyes in fear of what I think is my certain death, I can hear the brakes screeching and my classmates screaming, and suddenly I feel something bump into my backpack and pushes it a foot downhill. After a moment of complete silence, me thinking I was dead, I finally realize I wasn't, and I dared to open my eyes. All I see is the dark rubber of a wheel inches away from my face. My backpack, or rather the amount of school books that were in my backpack, that saved me from getting hit by the front of the car with enough force to push me to safety, leaving my head intact. Without those extra 5 inches on my back, my brain would have ended up as a puddle of red jello on the road. And thanks to the old man in the car slowing down to 5 miles per hour when passing playing school children, while also being fast enough on the brakes and having put on brand new winter tires for the season. Do your homework, kids. It might save your life.